Good early morning to those out in California, East Coast women. I shouldn't just say California. But good evening to New Delhi, India, and welcome to my home. I'm Mary Hanson Harrison. I'm the current Congress coordinator and past president of the WILF US section. I am also part of the leadership team in WILF Des Moines currently, and it's Des Moines, Iowa, and we'll get back to the Iowa in a minute. Right now, I'd like to take a little bit of time and tell you the story of how this Congress adventure came to be to fruition. And it's an interesting and challenging story. And we're in it right now and enjoying it. The Congress Program Committee, Janet Slagter, Laura Dewey, Beverly Fitzpatrick, and Robin Lloyd, and myself, along with the advice from Darian DeLue, our president, envisioned a more democratic and diverse interchange among members using our Zoom challenge and the public as well. We put out a call for proposals for presentations, and we had a remarkable return. It really was astounding that we had almost 43 hours of proposals. But we have had the work in our organizing principle, as you should say, to highlight the branches and our branch members and also our issue committees to see the real work of WILF, so you'll get to know us better, as well as noted speakers. The astonishment after we got over it, the best part is that we sort of sifted through the proposals, and two themes rose out of this sort of holistic look at WILF US, and the two themes rose organically, like we wanted them to sort of come from the inside of WILF and for outside outreach. That when we chose our overarching theme was women power and social justice, building from strength. As I said, we had this, when we were looking at the proposals, we had this sort of organic view of two separate issues or overarching issues. And it came out to be the first weekend plus how-tos, of course, but the first weekend would be that we would look at environmental justice as social justice, or is social justice. And the next weekend would be using our power for peace. And that turned out to be actually very thrilling for us, because it enlightens not only our particular framework for WILF, but we were hoping that would transfer to all of you. Because we are here today to celebrate 160 years. The celebration also has a mourning component, a sadness, of course, that we have been through and are continuing to go through a very troubled time around the world, and with not only a pandemic, but so much environmental devastation. So why we envisioned this Congress, we wanted to build a world of women, and here, and men, there are men, and it's for you, all of you who are picking up the pieces, who come out on the streets, who carry the seeds. Well, I should say that carry the water and plant the seeds to harvest peace. And it is not a patient peace, but a working, rolled up your sleeves peace as a collective. We are here to work together and to honor each of us, each of you, as individual women of distinction. We want to bring here also today the world we promised ourselves. When we look at the Me Too movement straight into the eye of violence, when we look at the Black Lives Movement straight into the eyes, we see the inequity of our skins. Our souls are searching here, floundering for a moment, soaring for the next. We will not turn away from our own hurt and anger and prejudice. We will pick up the soil called Mother Earth and protect her with our lives. Staying alive, which is one of my favorite titles, or books, I should say, by Vandana Shiva. We will grow within ourselves while reaching out. I don't say this lightly, but we are in terrible trouble, as Darian pointed out. But that's why we're here today. That's why we are spending 2 weeks looking at what WILF US, our members, and our collective selves, our collaborators, those people who you are, who believe in our shared values. We're here in this big, expansive Congress, just for you. As Jane Addams demanded in 1919 in a Zurich Women's Conference, we must learn to use our moral energy. Where did we hear that last night? We must use our moral energy to create a new sort of force in the world. And here we are, just doing that. And I think, having said that, I can turn now to our next, and I should say it's a conversation of faith, as it was last night. It's a conversation of trust. It's a conversation of using that word power to mean peace. And it is in this framework that we have asked Dr. Shiva and Patty Naylor to start a conversation about our world as we want it to be, as we are working for it. This is our chance. This is our change. This is our transformation. We can do that. I'd like to now now that I've welcomed you into my home, I'd like you to introduce you to Patty Naylor, who comes from my home state. Patty has worked with Will for a long time. We presented at a Commission of Status Women on agriculture, the revolution that we are proposing. Patty has run for public office as well. But most in her heart, she is that farm girl that both of us are. And Patty, you take it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Greetings, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here today with the 34th Triennial Congress. We are joined by one of the most inspiring women I can imagine, Dr. Vandana Shiva. Excuse me. Dr. Shiva has been an advocate, a thinker, and an activist for decades. Her life's work exemplifies the character that the women of Wilf also strive toward. Courage to speak the truth and to stand up to the corporations and those in power, all to make this world a better place for every single person today and into the future. Interconnectedness is a theme of her work. The issues she has focused on are, in fact, interconnected with many issues that Wilf highlights: climate change, hunger, human rights, earth justice, biodiversity, food sovereignty, peace, and freedom. Dr. Shiva's broad global perspective, articulated through the lens of ecofeminism, emphasizes the understanding that we are all connected and the issues we face are connected. That is what brings us here today. The corporate-controlled industrial agriculture model that is being promoted around the world has a long list of harmful results. The very basic human right, the right to food, is being ignored as food is used as a tool for political and social control, and even as a weapon. Nature, seeds, soil, and water, is being financialized. Every aspect of the global food chain is being digitalized, where the data collected about crops is more valuable than the crop itself. Farmers are being replaced by technology, and people are being treated as objects to be moved around the globe to perform the labor needed in the production, processing, and distribution of food. Racial, gender, environmental, and economic injustices are embedded in this capitalist colonizing system. Peasants and indigenous peoples are being pushed off their ancestral lands. And the pandemic revealed the fragility of this globalized food supply chain, yet powerful exporting countries and corporations are digging in their heels to claim their model of agriculture is needed to address climate change and to feed the world, as we can see in the upcoming UN Food System Summit. In spite of earning a PhD in the foundations of quantum theory, Dr. Shiva turned her attention to agriculture in 1984, the year that India's farmers rose up in protest against the Green Revolution and the disaster at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, that killed thousands of people. Since that time, she has practiced and promoted a poison-free model of farming based on peace and nonviolence. Dr. Shiva started a nonprofit organization to save seeds from patenting and genetic engineering, also known as GMOs. Named Navdanya, meaning 9 seeds, this name symbolizes the goal of the protection of biological and cultural diversity through seeds. In her recent book, Oneness versus the 1%, which many of us have read, she outlines how big tech is now capturing agriculture and the means of production and in continuation of its violent, destructive path. As a description of this book states, quote, she exposes the 1%'s model of philanthrocapitalism, which is about deploying uncountable money to bypass democratic structures, derail diversity, and impose totalitarian ideas. Join me in welcoming Dr. Vandana Shiva as she shares with us strategies that we can take to protect farmer livelihoods, people's health, people's freedom, and Mother Earth. Welcome, Dr. Shiva.
Thank you very much, Patty. There's an echo somehow. Thank you, Patty, and thank you, Mary, and thank you to the wonderful women of wealth. I'm so happy to join you for your 160-year celebration. And that is sustainability.
Yeah, right. You're right about that.
And is a kind of sustainability on which we have to build, because so much is short-term, fast food, fast fashion, fast this. And Bill Gates did this new one ag for the whole world, Gates Ag One, one ag, which he'll run. And the headquarters is in Missouri next to Monsanto. So he wants this one ag, and the person who's heading that division, who came from the Gates Foundation, actually says so clearly, for Bill Gates, time is the enemy. Anything lasting has to be destroyed. And reckless experimentation with planet Earth, whether it be new genetic engineering based on gene editing or geoengineering, which he's trying to do as a so-called solution to climate change, which will make climate change worse. You don't solve pollution by more pollution. Worse, he actually has a project he's financing where he is financing the making of breast milk in lab as a solution to climate change. Yeah? And women's bodies have always been seen as a problem by the capitalist patriarchs. So when Mary was saying and was quoting, we must learn to use our moral strengths to create a new source of force in the world, I really do believe that our power in creative and non-violent form is what we live, but what we have to articulate much better. Because there is this very false assumption that power has to be dominating and power has to be violent. And I'm so grateful to Patty that she went through so much of my background of why I came into agriculture, and so I won't have to spend any time on that. But in my learning in all of these years from 1984 and those disasters, whether it was the Carbide disaster in Bhopal or the uprising of our farmers, since that time, I've increasingly seen industrial agriculture as a militaristic venture. It is literally war, not only metaphorically, but materially too, because every input, every chemical, fertilizers came from the explosive factories, pesticides, descendants of the gases used to gas people in the gas chambers of Hitler. And so we have the source of industrial agriculture, both in the mind, as a militarized mind of extermination, that anyone different from me must be exterminated. But that got carried over to agriculture. And so insects had to be exterminated, and now we have insecticide. Plants are being exterminated. Everything green has to be wiped out by Roundup. And I call this the Roundup mentality. Yeah. And all over, I mean, in the United States, you've got so much evidence of the harm this has done and the constantly losing battle that Bayer is facing. And to me, it's very interesting that Bayer and Monsanto were one during Hitler's time in a company called Mobe. And now Bayer has bought Monsanto. So in a way, they're back to Mobe. So these were instruments of war. And this is what Wilf was born to resist and find an alternative to. A logic of extermination creates tools of extermination. What began in Hitler's concentration camps is the extinction crisis of today, the extinction of biodiversity. But in my view, small farmers are a threatened species because the paradigm of agriculture, its calculus, totally manipulated calculus, its instruments. And as Patty's quoted, a future where they're imagining farming without farmers. and food without farms. Gates and Silicon Valley, having made so much money, they are the billionaires. Big tech is the billionaires. And most of them, doing defense contracts. Now they want to make money by fabricating food and taking food away. Because when I grow a corn in my field, I'm feeding the butterflies and bees. I'm feeding, we rarely get any corn left because the birds have such a feast. And we have so many birds because we don't use pesticides. And we have such beautiful pollinators. We have 6 times more pollinators on our farm than in the forest. And we've done a lot of scientific research. It shows that 1/3 of the food we eat comes from pollinators. So when you use chemical warfare, you wiped out 1/3 of the food we eat. Biodiversity intensification can double the food production. So if you don't use chemicals and don't do monocultures, you can have twice the food. And the new research that we are doing in the regeneration movement is so inspiring, because chemical fertilizers are war against the soil. Define soil as an empty container where you pour nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. But the soil is not an empty container, as you all have mentioned. She is Mother Earth, she's Pachamama, she's Bhumi, and she is the very basis of our life. It's not an accident that living soil is humus, and the word human is derived from humus. And in the Jewish tradition, the word Adam is derived from Adamus. So we are children of the soil, no matter how much we pretend. We are the masters, we are the owners. When we define the soil as empty, we will destroy her life. But when we give back in gratitude to the earth, the soils get absolutely abundant with soil microorganisms. In 1 little cubic inch, billions. In 1 meter, 23,000 kilometers long fungi. And the new research is showing that the increased intensity of fungi actually helps the plant produce more. And this potential is 5 times more. So by feeding the soil, by feeding the pollinators, we can actually address the hunger crisis. This, to me, is nonviolent farming, because food is really the web of life. And I used to actually, when I used to do physics, I used to think I can live on coffee and tea all my life. Just keep. I did my PhD refilling cups of Lapsang Souchong. And the more I work on agriculture, the more my respect for food grows. And I now increasingly see that what moves through is food and nutrition. What moves through the web of life is food and nutrition. And so every mega problem we witness today, emergencies of every kind, are related to a violent food system. Take climate change, the work I've done a book called Soil Not Oil. 50% of the greenhouse gases come from this industrial agriculture, that's war, where every chemical is based on fossil fuels. I do wish some more of our friends who talk about energy alone would see how fossil fuels have become the basis of our food system. And we're literally eating oil. If you look at how much oil there is in food and how many poisons there are in food, these are all petrochemical, and all of them are derived from fossil fuels. Long distance transport, Patty mentioned how the supply chains collapsed during COVID. And yet every discussion you find, because there's a climate treaty coming up in a COP coming up in Glasgow, all these big supply chains saying, we'll continue to ship food, but now we must invent how we can ship it with hydrogen trucks, or how we can have more and more courier services with renewable energy. No one's looking at the materials that go into this and how much entropy is created. All the junk food that's destroying our gut microbiome. And I repeatedly say the health of the planet, our health, is one health. And with will, I would add, the peace with the planet and peace in society and peace with our bodies is one peace. And this is what we have to strive for. our work is also showing that when you do ecological agriculture and you protect biodiversity, you're actually also solving climate change. Because what is the climate problem? The rupture of the cycles of life, of cycles of Gaia, of Mother Earth, the rupture of the carbon cycle, of the nitrogen cycle. These are the planetary boundaries that have been broken. But we can heal them. That is the power we bring, the power of healing. And, it's fascinating that I've been writing on my new book on going from an economics of greed to an economics of care, which obviously, women are leading this shift of nonviolent economic thought. And, Mary in the introduction talked about the movements around us, the Black Lives Matter and Me Too. And we've been made to think in terms of, fragmented injustices, a racial injustice, a gender injustice, economic injustice. But at the end of it, they all have common roots. And those common roots are the beginning of colonialism. But the same common roots are the enclosures of the commons. The same common roots are the witch hunts. It was all happening at the same time because a whole new violent system was being created. And knowledgeable women who saw themselves as part of the earth had to be burnt as witches. And, there was a papal bull written 50 years before the Columbus papal bull of Pope Alexander to say, anyone who thinks they're part of the earth, burn them as witches. And we need to revisit some of these common roots so that we can build common solidarities rather than lose a lot of the energies in dealing with silo fragmentation that have been imposed through capitalist patriarchy. The extinction of farmers, the extinction of health. Look at the fact that we are living through 1.5 years of COVID. For 30 years, we have been having new emergent diseases, 1 year Ebola, 1 year SARS, 1 year Zika, 1 year something, HIV. They just keep coming. Where are their roots? Agribusiness invading into the forest to grow soybean in the Amazon, palm oil in every rainforest in Asia, or Africa in the Congo. We're taking away the homes of animals. And viruses who are totally safe for the animals in the forest are now unsafe for us. And they're becoming the new pandemics. So, in fact, COVID has its roots. COVID and other emergent diseases, the Ebola, have their roots in the limitless greed of agribusiness and invasions. Because agriculture, for me, is care for the earth. And when you care for the earth, you spray in the same place. 60,000 years, the Aboriginal Australians farmed. They were not bushmen, they were farmers. 10,000 years, my culture has farmed the same land. Same peasants in the same piece of 2 acres, thousands of years. And the soil got richer, as our work is showing. When you care for the earth, you increase the carbon, the nitrogen, the zinc, the iron, the calcium. And out of this, the plants take up more nutrition. Globally, food is losing nutrition, not only because you bred seeds that aren't for nutrition, whereas women bred seeds for taste and nutrition and health. The new seeds are for increasing weight, the Cartesian measure. And, when you think of Descartes saying, I'm a thinking thing without a body, how can we trust the body of the earth and our bodies in that kind of paradigm? Or Bacon, who said, we have to subjugate nature and enslave her. And for those of you who think, oh, this is past, no. I've just done a little book on the future of food and health. It's a tiny little book. And it's quite unbelievable. We have iron deficiency because A, we've destroyed iron in the soil. 2, we've destroyed iron in our foods. 3rd, we've destroyed iron-rich plants through spraying Roundup and weedicides and herbicides. So what does Google want to do? Introduce, they have a 5-year-old division of life sciences. And they want to introduce nanoparticles of iron into our blood. Nanoparticles are 10 to the power minus 9, never been tested. They go through every protective membrane because health is about interaction, but membranes that protect. The two have to go together. We have to have autonomy in rejecting the toxic and accepting the non-toxic. When that collapses in the membranes, we have disease. But then Google goes on to say, or at least the head of the life sciences Google says, we have to defeat Mother Nature. And that is what our power and our energy has to resist and provide an alternative. So when we think of regenerative agriculture and the work that I have been doing now since 1984, is first and foremost, we actually grow more food. So it's a myth that we need agriculture like war to feed the world. It's a myth. It's making peace with the earth that grows more food. And our work has shown that if you shift from measuring yield of empty food, that's toxic, to measuring nutrition per acre and health per acre, then women's agriculture turns out to be more productive. You know, in Nigeria, 5% land is under women's hand, grows 50% of the food. 80% of the food we eat today comes from small farms, many of them women run. So women are the providers of food in the world because they work not at war with nature, they work as co-creators with nature. And the power of regeneration to me is reclaiming the power of the generative, because both colonialism and industrialism and globalization as a return of all of this, the one thing they want to deny is the generative power of the seed to become seed. And therefore you must have patents to prevent seed saving. Therefore you must have GMOs, which kill the monarch butterfly, which kill the soil organisms and the Bt toxin crops in India. Now, 30 years of GMOs have shown us, A, they haven't worked. 2, they haven't done what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to control pests and weeds, and they've given us super pests and super weeds. And therefore, there's this hunger now for new gene technologies that Bill Gates is driving. And this, Patty talked about the UN Food Summit. It's about A, the new gene editing and deregulation. These are new GMOs because GMOs is anything modified. Second, digitalization to undermine every law and also control agriculture through a surveillance economy. It is about displacing farmers and it is about displacing food. But if food is the currency of life, displacing food means you've broken the ultimate web of life. If you are growing just GM corn and GMO soya to be carbohydrates and proteins to be then modulated in the labs, and you might have seen the Impossible Burger, it's now being found out to be totally hazardous in rat tests. The entire intestinal system, the gut had immunity collapse. All kinds of irritants were building up. These were the early researchers with GMOs anyway, and what the Impossible Burger is GMO soya. 14 patents. So as you make fake food with 30 ingredients, each ingredient has 10 patents, Silicon Valley is laughing them. They're saying, oh, like software, we made so much money. Now we're going to make money. That's where our power comes. Our power is the power to say no with courage, with deep love for Mother Earth and deep love for each other. That's our power of resistance. Regeneration of the soil. We do a lot of detailed research, but we work with, we train more than 1 million farmers. And every farmer who shifted to regeneration started to grow more food and have higher incomes. Our farmers are earning 10 times more by giving up all these toxic inputs. We're regenerating our health. And during COVID, my sisters, the farmers, would call me and say, thank you for telling us to grow gardens and our own food. Because as the systems collapsed, we had food. And now that we were growing gardens, we realized, but my mother used to grow this herb. And my mother used to do this. And they're remembering all this forgotten women's knowledge. And they heal themselves. In our villages, no one had a serious impact of COVID. They were just using all the ancient Ayurvedic knowledge that has been passed on through generation. So they became not only their own kitchens, but they became their own pharmacy. And we have to resurrect these knowledges. It is, for me, regeneration is about regenerating peace. Because what we are facing is war in every dimension of our life. And therefore, we must have peace in every dimension of our life. And because, as Patty said in the early stages, because we're facing total control, can you imagine a system where your food is controlled, your communication is controlled, your education is controlled, your health is controlled, and it's all integrated into one grand surveillance capitalism? This system is what we have to say no to. And we can only say no to it when we build our own systems. And our own systems are based on building community, both the local communities where we are, the earth community to which we belong, and the future communities to whom we have to hand over an earth. Making peace with the earth is regeneration. Making peace with our power and recognizing our nonviolent creative power, our generative power, our ability to create abundance without external inputs, our ability to share knowledge and therefore have more knowledge rather than intellectual property and monopoly and royalties and patents. Here are the models, scarcity versus abundance, violence against non-violence, beautiful peace of every part of life, of the planet, of the skies, of the soil, of the waters. This is our work. And every time we see the fires, and every time we see the floods, and every time we see the diseases, let us remember that in peaceful form, we can create another world, and we have to begin with ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Shiva. We do have some questions prepared for you. We can do this in a conversation sort of way, very informal. I am so inspired by your words and your passion. My husband and I are farming organically now, and it's been an incredible way of change in how we look at how we farm. I also involved in the UN Food System Summit counter mobilization, and your words remind me of a farmer in our who spoke from Senegal during the People's Rally against the UN Food System Summit. He said, as he transitioned to a regenerative agroecological model of farming, his first step was to ask the land for forgiveness, which I think is a very telling, a very symbolic way of looking at this. I think what you're saying is that we need to look at the world in a different way, and we need to help others do the same. I think my first question then to you, as we get into this, and if others want to ask questions, we will have some questions from the audience as well, has to do with climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change on climate change report was released just last Monday with more dire warnings of the condition of Mother Earth. It's quite clear with examples from the UN Food System Summit planned in September and the contentious negotiations that we experienced on the guidelines on agroecology at the Committee for World Food Security, that technological solutions are being promoted, as you've already said, as agriculture's contribution to reversing and mitigating climate change. These include climate smart agriculture, nature-based solutions, carbon offsets. So my question is then, how do we advocate for the technologies that truly do help farmers around the world, and then also, and while also exposing the technologies that are only profit driven and are destroying the world? How do we talk about technology in that sense?
If you go back to the witch hunts, what were they about? They were basically about not only criminalizing women's knowledge and technologies, but making them invisible. So I think the first way in which we start talking about technology is first take away the capital T and put a small t. That technologies are tools. Technologies are systems of organization. And nature has tools, women have evolved tools, peasants have evolved tools, and we need to give that respect of recognition back. So here is Gates with solar geoengineering, with fake food as a climate solution. And he actually has, just by chance, this is sitting on my table. He's got this book where he's actually promoting, synthetic fertilizers, like I said, come from the war, but they are emitting a greenhouse gas 300 times more damaging than carbon dioxide, promoting fertilizers. And for cows, we get cow dung, we turn it into fertilizer. He's saying the reason we have methane, he's got his science so wrong. The reason we have methane is because cows have 4 stomachs. If cows grazed because they're herbivores, we wouldn't have built up methane. When you put cows in factories and feed them intensive feed of soya and beans, that's when methane is emitted. So he's blaming the cow and he's offering a fake solution. And then at the end of it is, I don't know how many of you have noticed, he has become the biggest farmland owner in America, just in this last year. And the Gates-linked Cottonwood Agriculture is one of the founding members of a new coalition of farmland owners and operators and environmental groups, and they call themselves Leading Harvest, just like he created Gavi and GAIN. GAIN is the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, golden rice. Gavi is force untested vaccines on people. And make money out of it. And he's financed every one of this, every bit of it. This group, Leading Harvest, is talking about one monoculture. I talked about Gates and one, of promoting more non-sustainable industrial agriculture, but they will be in charge of verifiable standards of what is sustainable. And you talked about offsets, Patty. So they've come up with the word net zero. And I'm disappointed the IPCC has used that term. Net zero, according to Gates, and he's written it in this book, is not reducing your pollution. It is just buying out someone else's share of clean. Yeah, these were called carbon credits in the Kyoto Protocol days. But they are working out a calculus of how they will calculate. And they will cheat at every level, because that's what they've done. So what are our challenges? Our challenges, for me, the first challenge is got to recognize the technology in the green leaf. He's investing big in carbon capture technologies, as if you have to put carbon dioxide into mine shafts and all and have explosions. The green leaf of a plant with the power of photosynthesis, and this is the non-violent power that we share with nature. It takes carbon dioxide and with the sunshine can give us carbohydrates, everything, food, fiber, and the oxygen we breathe. Now show me a technology that is as sophisticated. Or show me the technologies of biodiversity intensive farming, because I've learned my agriculture by watching women peasants. 12 crops together. Paranaja, 12. Navdanya, the word 9 seeds. It's not about 9 seeds. It's about 9 crops growing together. That ability to work in harmony, that power is our technology. So we've got to stop denying our own technologies and seeing what the conquerors want to call technologies as technologies. We've got to start recognizing the difference between violent technologies. We've got to say no. That's why Wilf was born. And a yes to non-violent technologies. We definitely have to be very alert on the fake climate solutions of carbon offsets, which my friends have called carbon slavery from Africa. Tom Goldstone called it a new carbon colonization. First of all, the soil is not only carbon. It's nonsense to talk about that. Good, rich soils are, first of all, living organisms. That's the main thing. But even in terms of elements, every element of the periodic table is in rich, fertile soils. So we can't engage in carbon reductionism. We've got to talk about living soils. And we cannot afford to trade our lives away with the false calculus. We've got to build economies that serve the earth, serve our communities, and build a regenerative economy while they regenerate democracy and peace.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I have to follow up with that then. You mentioned talking about economies of peace, and you mentioned the economies of greed. We need to change to the economies of care. But I wonder how we're going to get there. Farmer livelihoods is one of the things we're concerned about, which I think is critical to food sovereignty for all people. Today's free market ideology and trade agreements allow corporations to buy the raw materials that they produce into manufactured foods at a globalized prices. Farmers are producing commodities, compete in free market with every other farmer around the world. So in India today, farmers have been protesting now for over 9 months against laws that would take away their minimum price supports, among other things. Here in the United States, we once had minimum price supports at parity levels, but those supports were eroded decades ago. So I would argue that the agriculture that dominates the United States landscape today is a result of that price support being taken away. We have far fewer farmers on a path where we'll not need farmers at all. Millions and millions of acres of corn and soybeans that corporations can buy at globally low prices, livestock in confinements and feedlots instead of on farms, devastated rural communities, polluted water and air, degraded soil, and unhealthy diets. So our policies that allow each country their own food sovereignty to set minimum parity prices for farmers, also enact supply management mechanisms, and maintain critical food reserves, an answer to reversing the march of industrial agriculture across the globe as it takes advantage of this market-based economy. Is this one of the solutions of how we transform our agriculture to where our vision is?
So Patty, in your introduction to me, you talked about the 1984 protests, and at one level, the current protests are a continuation of that. You know, the people with white flowing beards would have been young men then. But they're also a continuation of the protests that started in 91 when the World Bank and IMF brought structural adjustment, and the current laws were actually framed in 91 by the World Bank. But that same year, we had the leak of the Dunkel draft of GATT, which became the World Trade Organization. And then I traveled across the country and I put together, we only had regional farm unions, and I put them all together into a national movement. And we had 500,000 farmers protesting against GATT in Bangalore, 200,000 protesting at the Red Fort before the Marrakesh. And the son of the person I was working with is today leading the protests. Yeah. So it's been generations of farmers. And the Indian farmers are very clear, it's about land, because Microsoft has been handed over all the land records. So they've got the soil records, the climate records, the insurance records. And then they're building on this carbon credits. So can you imagine how much they can manipulate digitally to basically take the farmland away? When we talk of seed sovereignty, we say seed is ours, not Monsanto's. Food sovereignty, we will grow the food, we'll choose the food we grow, we will determine the systems through which we exchange it. That's food sovereignty. Knowledge sovereignty, it's not you putting junk into our heads, siphoning our data and then feeding us back with algorithm-based big data and making that the next external input. As at first they said land is empty, terra nullius. Then they said life is empty, took patents and seed. And now they say your minds are empty, we're going to pump you with the rubbish. And we say, no, land is not empty, she's Mother Earth. Seeds are living and our minds are full of knowledge. And why we have forgotten it, we will regenerate it. I run a grandmother's university for older women to teach younger women what is being forgotten. This morning, I was actually addressing a big conference on the forgotten during the pandemic. What did we forget? What are the diseases we forgot to attend to? What are the capacities we forgot to attend to? What are the roots of causes that we forgot to attend to? So I think if you look back, even while agribusiness has been dismantling and dismantling and dismantling, look at the growth of the ecological agriculture movement. Look at the growth of the food sovereignty movement. So if we compare the two, the rate of growth, organic farming is growing much faster than industrial farming is spreading. And, when we did a study, we found most of the new farmers are women. Most of the young new farmers are women, many of them university educated. And they're realizing bad food systems are the source of the problem. And peaceful food systems are the source of the solution. People are making these choices very consciously. And I think we have a dual duty, both to make what people are doing more visible and link much more intimately with it, but also call the bluff. I feel blessed that I was able to attend a meeting in '87 where the chemical industry was talking about GMOs and patents. And that's why I started Navdanya. That's why I started Safety. We called the bluff on them. They were going to introduce GMOs 6-7 years later. In India, 15 years later, we were prepared. We were prepared with the science. We were prepared with the democratic movements. We've got to do that with the Gates agenda and the Food Summit agenda. We've got to call the bluff on digital agriculture. Digital systems are merely a communication systems. They're not generative systems. They don't create life. They don't sustain life. They don't nourish life. And if there's one strength we women have, is we never stop talking about life. They tried to silence us. But ecofeminism for me is a philosophy of the celebration of life, the creative power of nature and the creative power of women. We were told nature's dead, we are stupid. We are not stupid. And nature's not dead. That is the strength we have to build on. And I think, Patty, if we can combine just 3 parts of the movement that are anyway strong, but they're fragmented. There's a huge ecological movement. I mean, just look at the climate movement alone. The climate movement, added with the biodiversity and extinction movement, and the water movement, and the toxic movement, and the movement against pesticides, and Roundup, and glyphosate. Take that. This, to me, is making peace with the earth. But take the farmers' movement, the food sovereignty movements, the small farmers' movement, and then the big, big movement on health. As chronic diseases have exploded, health awareness has also exploded. And more doctors are realizing, oh my God, it begins in the gut. And therefore it begins with food. And therefore the connection between food and health is becoming so intimate. And, we are 600, how much we are? 380 trillion vibromes is us, human beings, 380 trillion. And 100 trillion microbes in our gut. And you already have the Bayers and the Monsantos and the Syngentas and the Bill Gates talking about engineering the gut microbiome. How many will you engineer? Engineering soil microbes. So I think the knowledge issue is so important. And connecting the ecological aspects, the production aspects of small farmers, and the health aspects of all eaters. That together means all human beings and all biodiversity on the planet. What a strong movement we are, as long as we see our interconnectedness. And that's the interconnectedness we have to build. And I hope the Women in Peace will continue this bridge building.
Absolutely. Of course. Well, Wilf is very much focused on these issues, and I thank you for that answer. So building on that, you mentioned the history of the farmers in India, organizing as they do, certainly coming out of the history of Gandhi and his nonviolent commitments. here in the United States, we had farmer protests back in the 70s and 80s with tractorcades at Washington, D.C. This more recently, we had the peaceful water protectors of life and water at Standing Rock, fighting against an oil pipeline. My question is, especially for our audience here of WILF members, how can we build these movements to be successful? The agribusiness is very powerful through government, the exporting governments, and through policy, like you say, the World Trade Organization. So my question is, how can movements like this, like what we see in India, we see other places around the world, how can these be successful? How can we in WILF build on these movements to radically transform and reimagine our food and agriculture system? How can we be successful? How can we educate others in a political and economic sense of what needs to be done?
I think WILF is so uniquely placed as a women's league for peace and freedom. And that is what we have to highlight, because we have an agriculture, a capitalist, patriarchal, militaristic agriculture run by the Monsantos who came out of war, the Bayers came out of war, agribusiness, the big tech industry and the big finance people, all joining hands very fast. And the three levels at which we need to articulate and intervene. The first is, name this as warfare. Name it as war against our gut and our health. And we will have many people joining when we name it as war against human beings and our gut and our bodies. And, and here is where the Me Too movement needs to stretch a little better. See, if the old movement was our bodies, ourselves, then this movement of food has to be our bodies, ourselves. This is the other side of food sovereignty. The production side is small farmers, but the consumer side of healthy food is our bodies, ourselves. The second part of this is that the convergence between the state and corporations and the hijack of governance by the corporation is so clear, especially with the UN Food Summit, which is no more. I said it shouldn't be called a UN summit, it should be called a Gates Summit. It shouldn't be called a food summit, it should be called the Gates Anti-Food Summit. Because, he's actually thinking of food that's not food, that'll destroy our health. So we have to start talking about reclaiming governance. And I've worked a lot with local governments across the world. They're much more ready to do this. Much. In fact, I'm an ambassador to the government of Barcelona. And you might remember you were having such a big movement on eviction right now. Well, that's what was happening in Spain after 2008 collapse. And then she led the movement of people to not allow themselves to be evicted. Do look at Ida's movement in Barcelona at that time. And they are this year's capital of food. And they've asked me to be ambassador. So we need to look at every level of governance, not just the national levels. Because what's being hijacked by corporations is the national system, but it's also destroying the federal systems. And we've got to therefore defend the fabric of decentralized governance. I think the other place where we have to make a big difference is where people have some level of purchasing power. They're making the shift to organic. They're making the shift to farmers' markets. They're making the shift to healthy eating. But a lot of people are in food deserts. A lot of people are just treated as throwaway people. And that is now the market. So this model of agribusiness can only work if the public money that we pay as taxes becomes the subsidy to feed junk and fake food to the poor. Because that's where choice doesn't exist. They're dependent on states. They're dependent on food stamps. They're dependent on public distribution systems. And that's where we have to close the cycle. That it's our tax money. The health is everyone's health. Here are farmers growing good food. This public money should be used to decentralize the food system. And I know people who have been able to take health money and turn it into organic purchase in farmers' markets as a prevention of diabetes, rather than money spent on diabetes care. So health will be a very big joiner in this shift. And one thing, they're talking about climate change, but they never talk health. It's the missing piece in the Gates model. It's the missing piece in agribusiness. And health is what we know is ours. And that's why back again to our bodies, ourselves. So our seeds, our farms, our food sovereignty, our land sovereignty, and linked to our bodies ourselves. This can be a very powerful unity.
Very good, thank you. I'm not exactly sure how much more time we have. I think we have a little more time. I have a question in the chat box. It says, you have been writing about and working against the problems of the free trade agreements for many years. For a while, the expansion of the WTO seems to have been abated. Do you think the emphasis has shifted from widening the reach of these free trade agreements as increasingly rich billionaires can afford to finance the world they desire independent of international treaties? And that leads to another question I have.
So one part of the big movements I didn't mention is the big Seattle mobilization that shut WTO down. Yeah. And you remember everything was, this is what democracy looks like. And the environmentalists and the trade unions worked together. And we put agriculture at the heart of the discussions. I remember organizing many sessions. So after that, actually, as Pascal Lamy said to me, he was the Director General of WTO for a while. He said, you all put WTO in intensive care. And it hasn't really come out of it. But that doesn't mean free trade has been put to sleep. It's just that it is no more the preferred platform. WTO is no more the preferred platform because multilateralism means every country speaks. And when the Asian peasants talk, and then the African peasants talk, all that feeds into their governments. And that's how we stopped Cancun also. And that's how we stopped Hong Kong. And in Cancun, I don't know, Patty, if you remember, the Korean farmer Lee committed suicide and said, I'm taking my life so the world will wake up to the fact that farmers are dying because of WTO. WTO is killing farmers, is what he said, climbed the fence, stabbed himself. And we mustn't forget that sacrifice and continue to stay away. 400,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide. And I know the suicide rates in US are high, in Europe are high. Farmers are the worst victims of this. What has happened, and it's not that the billionaires by themselves can do nothing. Their money will do nothing. They do need a breaking down of systems to make their preferred agendas work. So they're working much more on bilateral bullying and regional trade agreements. Yeah. So it's not that free trade has gone away. The multilateral system has been killed or is in weak systems. What is coming in its place are new free trade agreements, which are even more dangerous because they're very unequal in power. And they all have these investor-state dispute settlement systems, where if a Monsanto says, that's my market, and India says, sorry, we won't let GMOs in. They're having a big debate right now on GMO soya import tea. And we say, no, we fight, and we say, no, we won't. Monsanto can sue us for lost markets, which they did in Germany, with the closure of nuclear plants, the tobacco industry. So I think at the end of it, we have to do concrete things locally where it's doable, which is what you're doing, what I'm doing, where our sphere of influence is. We have to create the constructive alternative. And in the rest of the place, we have to build the ideas and the paradigms that can be shared across different sectors, across different countries, with a dream and a vision of a livable world, because the current system on fast forward will be over the cliff in 10 years. Yeah. the floods and the fires and the infectious diseases will be out of control. And the chronic diseases will, as it is, my friends in US can't get treatment if they don't have an insurance coverage. Now, that's not how health should function. Health is a public good, education is a public good. So reclaiming the commons has to be another call we make. That the common good for the earth and common good for humanity is a commons. And just like peasants resisted then, and we can say, oh, they resisted, but the commons were enclosed. But they tried with seeds, and we didn't let them enclose the seeds. Yeah. So we have to reclaim food as a commons, the land as a commons. In the US, you have this amazing indigenous movement of land back. And we have to find out. I say to my friends, I said, you're so good at saying you stand at a desk and say, I acknowledge that I'm standing on the land of so and so, so and so, so and so. And so we have to take it one step further. Besides just, the statement, let's be creative in terms of just like 9 seeds can thrive together. Let us have a thriving of the different strands of humanity, some of them in their histories in conflict. But a history of conflict doesn't mean a future of violence. The future has to be of common peace. And that's where Will can play a very big role.
Thank you. Yes, certainly. You mentioned whatever your spheres of influence are. So wherever Wilf and any of us can work is important. You mentioned multilateralism. That is what is at stake at the UN Food Systems Summit. Yeah. Instead, they're talking about multi-stakeholders instead of multilateralism. Quite a difference. We have a couple of questions in the chat box. I'm going to see if I can find, okay, here. Several different ones. First one is, have women farmers played a big role in the farmer strikes in India? Have these strikes affected the Modi government politically?
Well, the women farmers have played a huge, huge role. And their particular days that are women's days. In fact, they've just had the parliament, farmers' parliament, going parallel to the national parliament. And the closing day was a women's day. So has it made a difference? We don't know. I mean, there's still massive denial mode, very big denial mode. Because, you see, power, patriarchal power, works on the assumption of brute force having the final say. Creative nonviolent power, the kind of power that Gandhi brought to bear, the kind of power that Martin Luther King brought to bear, the kind of power that Mandela brought to bear, is the kind of power that women bring to bear every day of their lives. Otherwise, there would be no survival. Every day of their lives is not a dominating, crushing power, but a power of increasing the power of everyone. Yeah? So it's not just creative power in isolation. It's a creative power in expansionism, horizontally expanding and touching everyone, everything. This, I think, is the imagination that will contest this brute power of I have money, I've got a government through the money, the government is mine to hijack, and no one can say a thing. But that's how empires worked, and empires came down. And we must constantly take encouragement from history that no dictatorship lasts. That's my simple learning. Dictatorships are terrible, but they last for a short time. But democracies and freedoms can carry on and on and on. Just like Wilf has carried on for 160 years.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. You sounded very positive when you speak in that way, as if and that's wonderful. But sometimes I feel very pessimistic about agriculture and the future of the world and the future of people. I do have another question in the chat box. I'd like to read that one. Are you interested in working on the dark money contributions for electing pro-industry Congress members? Here in Iowa, even legislators who are farmers are so programmed by big ag, they insist that they don't know about any negatives involved in agrochemical and fake food. And I'll expand on that. Our politicians here in the United States and our locally, state, federal level, they have been brainwashed to believe that industrial agriculture is the way. Everything from methane biodigesters and CAFOs, the confinement of animals, to denying the impact that industrial agriculture has had on our water quality. And as they say, the pesticides that have been spread around the world, on our land, into our air and our water, and the fake food that results. Are you interested in working on the dark money involved in on that side of the political debate?
Of course, I'm interested.
And so, how do we approach that? How do we show that there's another side to, or there's these influence behind the scenes? I guess that's kind of what we're talking about.
And this is where we need partnerships, because everyone can't do everything. And I always see true movement building as a string of pearls, yeah? That each of the pearls is separate, but there's a string that connects them. And that string has to be, in our times, the love for the earth, the love for our freedom, and a love for the future. And that passion is what has to drive the common interest. So there are some people who keep track of money, and we need to draw them in to our circle. And it doesn't mean all the time, everyone sits together all the time. No, it means we have an interaction. And I always take a lot of inspiration from the mycorrhizal fungi, does its work. And then it just connects to the root and gives the food to the plant. So that's how we have to function, lightly, often invisibly. But we nourish the plants. We nourish our communities. And so some people will have to do that. But the other thing that we have to do is bring the externalities. And I have a report called Wealth Per Acre, where we took externalities of chemical agriculture in terms of harm to farmers, harm to the environment. It's $1.3 trillion. And you're in Iowa. And I think if you were to create a coalition of concerned, not just concerned farmers, concerned health people who are worried about the pollution of the water. Yeah, it is so polluted. And I think you need to create an alliance with the Mexicans, because I know you have a senator from Iowa who threatened Mexico because they said no GMOs, no glyphosate. And I think farmers of Iowa should directly link to farmers of Mexico and say, we are with you. Dark money might make the senator speak this nonsense, but Mother Earth speaks through us.
Dark money speaks, but Mother Earth speaks more loudly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. I think we have another question in the chat box. And I've got a couple more too for you. May I ask, Dr. Shiva, we've been speaking now for about an hour. Are you able to stay with us for a little bit longer?
5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Excuse me while I scroll through to see if I can find, I don't see any more from the chat. I'm going to go back to one that I had myself that we talked about. You mentioned how Bill Gates owns a lot of farmland. Certainly, if we're going to have food sovereignty and local economies and the kind of agriculture that we dream of, that we can imagine, we need access to land. Here in the United States, we have this settler colonialism, colonizing mindset that talks about how we need to have our land ownership and private property rights are so important. And so we have Bill Gates who's bought land. We have corporations who's buying land here in the United States and around the world. So the question, I guess, is can you expand on that problem? How do we deal with ownership of land? What can be done, and how can we help change this mindset?
So first, again, we have to recognize it's very recent. Private property in land is very recent. It goes with colonialism. Till colonialism, land was commons. People had usufructory right to land. You had private title for use. And that could be passed on generation to generation to generation, and local communities decided that. But it was not for trade. Property is tradable. So private property, in the word private itself, you know what, it's derived from privare, which means to deprive. So it's created by depriving the others. And if you look at the literature, and I find it fascinating that the justification of private property was being written in England at a time where land was being grabbed from the indigenous people in the Americas. But they weren't even talking about this, nor were they talking about the enclosures of the commons, which was happening at the same time in England. And they're basically saying, oh, we improved the land. So back again to the agriculture issue. I think now we've seen how this was never an improvement, but a devastation of Mother Earth. So we go back to the foundation, say you were wrong. And we need to connect all these small things happening, the bison coming back to the prairies, the land back movement, connect all those fragmented narratives, you know, they're all a little bit here and a little bit there. And we have to connect it really to the narrative of Mother Earth as the unifying force. We have to tap every creative initiative. So during our freedom movement, one of Gandhi's disciples, associates, started something called a Bhudan movement. Bhudan means a gift of land. And he would go to rich landlords, say, why don't you give your land so the landless can have land? And millions of acres were collected and given to the landless. But even today, the women I work with, many landless women, they've just got together and created a commons to work together in collective farming. Individually, they can't afford to buy land, but 20 of them together can get land on lease. So we need to look at, and maybe this is something Wolf can work on, what are the amazing initiatives which are not private property based, but a sharing economy and a caring economy, an economy based on care for the land. And once it's care for the land, then everyone joins. But when it's ownership, everyone fights. Yeah. So how we can turn it into a peacemaking, both with Mother Earth and within community. And we have to look around. Where is it working? How is it working? And just like Navdanya means diversity in the farm, we need diversity of politics and democracy. We need different ways. I think we should just give up the perfect miracle. Yeah. We don't need to look back. Anything that worked anywhere, let's try it.
That is very beautiful and powerful, Dr. Shiva. Thank you. Certainly a sharing and caring economy is something we should be striving for. Would you like to say a few final words for us?
Well, you said, sometimes things look dismal. Of course they look dismal. I don't deny it. I'm not in some dreamy world. I don't just live through this. Today we had a flood on our farm, and I can just see the force of water. But exactly that which can make us scared. If you look at it and say, oh, Mother Earth is acting, then we start changing our behavior and we find a new power of work, making peace with the earth. See, the agenda changes. When you think of the earth as dead, and all you see is these strange storms and strange fires, then you get more and more afraid. But when you say, oh my God, she gets louder by the day, her screams, can't ignore them anymore. And what is she saying? And how should we change? And where is it we as women can bring not just a new imagination? The beauty of women's justice is we've survived because we lived it all along. We survived the witch hunts. We survived patriarchy. And because we know how to survive disasters and oppression and violence, all the resilience that allows us to survive is the resilience that humanity is being called on to cultivate as a whole. The earth will give it to us. Yeah. And, but there are two sentences I use, I always say, if you think you're Atlas carrying the earth on your shoulder, then you are a very afraid Atlas right now because everything is in a bad shape. But if you recognize the earth is carrying you, then you start to tread lightly. And you start to talk about treading lightly as a more sophisticated way of being on this earth. And that's our work. That's our work of being able to bring dignity to that which was considered passive, activity and creativity to that which was considered inert. And when you look at that, then of course there's hope. And then of course there's joy. And then you realize, well, you have to do a very tiny bit. Yeah, I've learned this from farming. I said, you don't have to control this and genetically engine and that. And all you have to do is do the little bit and say, I care for you, Mother Earth. Apologize and give back a little bit. And amazing things start to happen. And that is what gives me hope. That's why I talk about seeds of hope. And that's why we plant gardens of hope. And birth should take on the gardens of hope as the big peacemaking in our times. Let's make gardens of hope everywhere.
Thank you so very much. We will continue this conversation here at the Congress, and we thank you, Dr. Shiva.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for all the WILF members. Bye-bye.
So Patty, I know that we have some additional time. I don't know if you would be willing to continue to accept questions. Our next program will be at 10 a.m. and we have some music available, but there seemed to be a lot of interest in discussion, so you may want to continue to take questions.
Yes, thank you. I can stay for another 10 minutes myself, and then I will need to leave. But I think this isn't, there's so much rich information here that I think conversation is very valuable. And whoever would like to, I'm not sure who would like to moderate this. If you want me to moderate for another 8 minutes, I guess I can, or if someone else would like to, I'd be happy to share that responsibility.
I think we'll be happy with you for 8 minutes, and we'll see what we can do through direct chatting to find who's after you.
Perfect. Again, yes, we had lots of information. Vandana Shiva is so inspiring, and she has so much experience. Let's see what we can find in the chat, I guess. I'm not sure if anyone wants to speak. Is there a mechanism to raise your hand, or sometimes you can just put an asterisk into the chat box if you'd like to speak? And I prefer anyone to ask their question rather than me reading the question out.
That's a little, we can call on people who raise their hands. That would be fine. And if they can't raise their hands, as you suggest, they can put an asterisk in the chat box and we'll call on them.
Very good.
Pretty much anybody should be able to raise their hand, which I think is still located in the under reactions on your meeting controls. Today it's under reactions. It has been other places. We have 2 hands up. Let me see if I can find out where they are.
I see, oops, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the hands. I saw one and it just.
Oh, Jean Verthine raised her hand.
And I've changed the mute
Okay.
situation so people can unmute themselves to ask their questions.
Great, thanks, E.T.
Would you put Nancy Price on the stack for a question?
Yeah, can someone else call?
I'll go ahead and call on people, and ET, if you would go ahead and remute people, and then I will unmute them as I call on them. So Jean, you should be able to speak now.
Okay, thank you, Darian. It's always a pleasure to see you. And I grew up in Wisconsin, a heavily, heavily agricultural state that turned agribusiness very fast while I grew up there. And much to my mother's despising this move, and she hated the efforts by the government to stir and keep going agribusiness. So I have a simple question. You know, women have always had gardens, excuse me. I mean, my grandmothers had gardens, my aunts had gardens, my mother had a garden, and I had to weed it all the time. So I wasn't so happy with it, but I did it. Is there any effort to draw people with the concept of gardening into this larger movement? Could you hear me?
Yes, Jean.
Okay.
Yes, I heard you. I imagine everyone did. That's a great question. There are, and that would be a question more for others here on WILF, but Vandana Shiva did mention her Gardens of Hope that she thought WILF members could highlight. And I think that might be an actual program that she leads. But we need to check on that. If anyone else has information, that'd be great. Gardenings are, and even just teaching children how to plant a seed and grow a garden is amazing.
Oh, for sure.
People had to do garden during the war.
Nancy Price is
Victory gardens.
Nancy Price is next up. Nancy?
Oh, hello. Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention, as Vandana Shiva was talking about the commons, Earth Democracy is going to revive seed, grow, and water our sunflower. You can find it at our website if you scroll way down below the drinking water PFAS long article. And we have a sunflower there. And at the center is communities and nature. And we have a sunflower petal on the commons, another one on rights of nature, another one on community rights versus corporate rights, and then guardianship for future generations. In any case, we're going to revive this and develop materials, and this could be part of what members and branches might like to know about and take into your branches, communities, etc. So look for that at some time at the end of the summer or in September when we develop the new materials to go with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Alan Haber, you had a question?
Actually, it was a deal. My computer is too hot, so I had to move on to Alan. And I wanted to ask, where is Commons in the US? Does any of our member besides Nancy have Commons?
Patty, can you respond to that?
Can I say something?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a very good question. I don't think I know the answer.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I spent hours of my life researching agricultural labor movements, especially in Ireland. And it was so true that I think in the South, there were Black farmers who were supposed to get their 40 acres and a mule, but were often denied it. But in Ireland, the same kind of movement with different aspects also joined together in commons, but it also grew out of a tradition of commons. But there was also a new kind of commons of people through agricultural laborers working together. And I wonder if there's anything, there are a lot of Midwesterners here. That's my impression. I'm not sure I'm correct. Certainly there's significant leadership coming from Midwesterners. I consider myself a Midwesterner who lives in New York. And I'm just interested, is there any movement among workers or farm laborers? If we look at the West Coast, the farm labor movement was very strong at one point. Any comments?
Excuse me, Jean, I thought you were going to respond to Odil's question.
Oh,
So-
okay, sorry.
If you could hold your question because there are a couple of people in line ahead of you.
Okay, sure, sorry.
Sure, no problem. Philip, I'm going to call on you, but I have to ask you to unmute yourself if you can.
Weapon by different countries. China is now the largest pork producer in America. China tried to buy the largest dairy production facilities in Australia, which they stopped that transaction. And how does the other countries buying into the agricultural business in America affecting the farming in America and it being used as a weapon? And also, the genocide was perpetrated upon the Indian population in America by killing off all the buffalo and starving the Indians in that fashion. And my last comment to go on to the end of a statement that was just made previously, Black people were never promised 40 acres and a mule. Thank you.
So I didn't catch your question, Philip. Did you have a particular question?
Yes, my question is, how is the Chinese government, by being the largest pork producer in America, affecting agriculture? And I believe that they are in a position to use food as a weapon. And is that a concern for Wolf and the farmers in the Midwest?
Nancy Price or Mary Hansen, could you respond to that question? You'll have to unmute yourself if so.
Yes, we're always concerned with that. And as Vandana pointed out, it's not just the Chinese, it's Bill Gates. So, I think we do have an institutional mentality with agriculture, well instilled, as was been said. And when I went back and visited and stayed for a while in near my farm where I grew up, you talk to the farmers, the industrial farmers, and they, I think it was alluded to before, they actually believe they are saving the world. They actually, you can't convince them, well, probably not in the conversation I was having, but they are certainly the idea that agriculture is saving the world from the green revolution, with the World Food Prize right there in Des Moines, given every year. That mentality is the one we have to talk to. I know in the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, we've been trying to talk to farmers rather than considering them the enemy. I mean, the industrial farmers. That the overcoming of the us and them mentality is essential in order to understand that you in this divided world, who is so easy to look in at us and them, is that you have to talk to the farmers. You have to sit down, and we have certainly effective protests in Iowa, but right now the hardest part is that farmers believe they are being good citizens. Industrial farmers.
Thank you, Mary. And I would like to just make sure people noticed the very informative chat from Gloria about the Grange movement. We heard from Vandana Shiva about a number of potential allies that we can be working with. As I emphasized in my presentation yesterday, it is critical in these very critical times that we seek out allies and work together to identify the assets we have in order to form a more effective movement. We can no longer waste time quarreling among ourselves We want to make sure we are able to make effective change. Okay, I believe that there was another hand raised, but I don't see any hands raised. So Jean,
There are two hands raised. Alan and Odile are back, probably about the Commons, and Mary Beth is here. And Jan Quarterman.
Nancy, please.
And Nancy, and I think Jan Quarterman has unmuted herself, and she would talk about Iowa also.
okay, let me ask Jan Quarterman to speak, and then Nancy, and then I will be direct messaging to the other potential speakers.
Well, thank you, Philip, for the question. Yeah, Smithfield is big here in Iowa. They're one of the big four producers, growers, producers. And the Farm System Reform Act will address part of that issue. And there's also been some work now by Biden and our Secretary of Ag to address some of this, try to break up some of these monopolies. So not to say there isn't a long ways to go and that either of these are perfect, but you're on the right track, and I appreciate the question.
Nancy, can you speak to that any further?
Well, since Jan just spoke, maybe she could point out that she and Lib Hutchby from the Triangle Branch in North Carolina have a panel coming up on CAFOs and the terrible damage that CAFOs do to land, water, air, and food quality. So I'll let Jan maybe come back and mention when their panel comes up, and then I'd just like to make a comment.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. And Emily, who's on with us here today, Emily Keel is going to be our moderator. We've got experts that are going to come and speak to us about the environmental impacts of confined animal feeding operations. Just a horrible way to raise food. It's not healthy. It's certainly hard on the animals and hard on our earth. And it's tomorrow. What time is it, Lib? Lib's going to have to weigh in, or Emily. I'd have to look at my calendar.
It's at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Alan Haber has a question, and Alan, you are now able to speak.
First, I'd like to ask 1 o'clock, what time? What region?
Eastern Standard, Eastern Daylight at 1 o'clock. So that would be earlier, of course, for Pacific.
Okay, so Alan Haber.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you. In Ann Arbor, we've been trying to develop a community commons. We put the question on the ballot. It took 11 years, and we do have a legal definition of our community commons. However, the powers that be do not want to recognize this at all. I put in the chat a fact that should be known in the United States, that in the development of our Constitution, the founding fathers said, James Wilson in particular, the purpose of the Constitution of the United States of America is to privatize the commons. And Thomas Jefferson, the surveyor, said the way to do that is to divide everything into squares and put a price on every one. And that is a system in the United States that makes it very difficult for users of the land actually to organize to share the productivity of the land. In the definition of the commons, it's commonly pooled resources. But in some way, the government or the private owners have to give up their private ownership or their governmental authority to the users. And that is found very difficult to accomplish. We're working on that in Ann Arbor. And it'll be the one place in the world where we actually do develop a commons that is based on the shared authority of the users rather than the on top authority of the state or some corporation. But we've been working on this. It is a very difficult to allow for the authorities to allow their authority to be given up to people, the ordinary people from the bottom up. So as you know, that is built into the structure of the United States, into the patterns. And it is, I would say, given what we are dealing with, a revolutionary objective.
Thank you, Alan. And Mary Beth, make sure you're unmuted. You're on next, or which is now. Mary Beth Gardam.
I can't unmute.
You have.
You have.
Okay, good. Yeah, I put in the chat that in the Midwest, everything is for sale, and this is an economic warfare measure against small family and organic farmers, because the price of pork is at its lowest point in decades, but the price of feed to feed those pigs is sky high. This is not an accident, and it's definitely being used to force small family farmers out of the business. There aren't that many left, but even those that are still around are being intimidated, and they're land poor, and they're being forced off their lands. And regarding what Alan was talking about, the commons and ways in which we can work to make the commons better understood and defended. At 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, the presentation today about young women innovators and solution people is worth listening to, because they are coming up with really exciting and hopeful solutions, like a shared economy, collaborative business models. We should be trying to make their solutions better known, and to work with farmers. Most of the land in the Midwest and around the country really are owned by aging women farmers. They're struggling, and if we could meet with them and try to form a partnership in which they do their farming, but we talk to them about how best to get the message out about organics, the threats being made against them, economic threats. I think that we could form some really effective partnerships that would go a long way towards preparing the very conservative folks in the Midwest for the next round of elections. This is really important work. It's difficult, but women are good at making connections. So let's reach out and do that.
Thank you, Mary Beth. And Nancy Price wanted to add to what she had said before, and we'll be wrapping up in about 6 minutes. Nancy?
I see I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. Well, I just wanted to follow up on the Gates and the Chinese and whoever else are buying up huge tracts of land in the US, which at the same time is happening in other countries, and particularly in Africa, where US corporations and the Chinese are fast buying up land, and often through rather corrupt situations, particularly where property rights and inheritance are not systematically honored for women and daughters, wives, etc., who could be inheriting land. So that's also another problem. But I'd like to point out that just in regard to the CAFOs, wherever they're situated, we have to really look there too and be sure we don't ignore the problem of labor. As we focus on the environment, we really need to look at the problem of labor, wages, and because this is an industrial process, we really have to expose the supply chains, the supply lines, the distribution processes, the packaging processes, because there's huge environmental costs there that we could also focus on as we look at the issue of food production, food use, consumerism, and climate, including the labor involved in the production. So I just like to see if we can close the circle a little bit more on the problem of industrial ag, and starting with CAFOs perhaps, and going on to the other processes, because we know, for example, what's happening with the destruction of the Amazon, which is a code red crisis, that there it's big ag wanting to grow GMO soy to feed the hogs or to produce the beef, et cetera. So we have to look at that. I mean, that's just an incredible environmental impact, which we really have to expose as well. So there are many aspects to this that we could draw sort of a diagram and link the points of education that we and movement building that we would like to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. I believe at this point we should give people a bit of a break. We are going to be stopping and restarting the recording. We'll put